As we know, WWDC was jam-packed with all sorts of stuff, ranging from macOS Big Surprise, iOS 14, transitioning to Apple Silicon. The biggest things that happened at WWDC this year was mainly in the Mac department. We got macOS Big Sur, or as what I'm officially going to call it as Big Surprise, because, well, the truth is, macOS Big Sur was something we never really expected. We did not expect the whole redesign or anything about it, even switching from 10 to 11. So I'm calling it macOS Big Surprise. But we got macOS Big Surprise, the announcement that Apple's transitioning to their own custom CPUs. There's a lot of stuff that's going on with the Mac. But there are some other things that I think need to be addressed as well that weren't really brought up in the keynote, but are just other minor issues that some people tend to complain about, Mac users at least. Myself being one of them. Should we dive in? First thing about the Mac I want to talk about, and this applies to practically every Mac, is the operating system, macOS Big Surprise. This has actually sparked quite a controversy because Apple gave it essentially redesign when most Mac users were already happy with the current design scheme it was in. Nobody was expecting it at all that macOS was getting a big redesign because there were no rumors, no leaks, nothing hinting at this. In fact, the truth is, we never really knew much about anything in terms of macOS software leaks. So, macOS Big Surprise. But obviously, with the whole new design change, that also changed a few other things that a lot of people are actually rather upset about. And here's what it is. New icons. Their new design was a little, if you ask me, unnecessary. If they wanted to make the whole icon design more like iOS, then why not just copy and paste iOS icons over to macOS? Because they did that with a few of the application icons. For example, Safari is practically the same, so is Mail, and Photos. Why can't they just copy and paste all the icons from iOS into macOS? They didn't really have to do this whole skeuomorphic thing that they did. They said they did it because they wanted to keep around the three-dimensional effects of the icons. If you ask me, you want to keep the three-dimensional shape of it, keep them like the way they already are. Example, pages, keynote, numbers. Some people don't mind this, some people are okay with the change, but others really don't like it. What do I think about it? Well, some icons are okay, I guess, but there are some others like Pages. I prefer the older Pages icon. Some icons are fitting and make sense, others don't really make that much sense because they're trying to fit it all into a square. But then it looks even more ridiculous when third parties come into play because they demonstrated it with a couple of other third parties. If you wanted it to keep like the iOS theme where every app icon always has the same shape no matter what, how come third parties still have their own custom shape, whatever it is? And then the other thing that I want to point out that Quinn Nelson had addressed in one of his videos, and it's something that I really hope Macs do not start coming with. macOS Big Surprise isn't just a redesign where the application icons changed. The whole UI has essentially been changed. Okay, we still got the main traffic light window system, but the highlighting effects have changed, the sizing and spacing of buttons have changed. We got a new control center, which is pretty much the same size as the control center on iPadOS or iOS. Now, if you ask me, I actually kind of dig some of the UI changes. Like, I love the highlighting effects, but what I don't like is the resizing of UI elements. I already think there are some elements in the UI that are just a little too big already, and now they've been expanded to something even bigger. And if you know me, I value screen real estate, that is a poor use of screen real estate. And in Quinn Nelson from Snazzy Labs, by the way, you might want to check that video out. I'll find a link to it and put it in the description. You might want to check out that video because he actually thinks because of these UI changes, touchscreens are going to come to the Mac. And with his reasons and all that, fairly reasonable to assume, yeah, because these UI elements are all seem to be optimized for a finger input. So is Apple really going to put touchscreens on their Macs? They could, but I don't want them to. And the reason for this is because, well, card right here, go check it out. But the basic problem I have is just with the OS input. A finger is not as precise as a pointer. It's all about precision. That's the difference between having a touchscreen and other tools. Now, if it's with a stylus, that's a different story, but last I checked, I don't really think Apple's not going to bring Apple Pencil support to the Mac, simply because A, none of them can reach an 180-degree flip. So that means you can't even get a flat, level surface with the MacBooks. What about the iMacs, though? The stand doesn't really allow that, because last I checked, the stand is one solid piece, not to mention how easy it is to tilt the display. One of my subscribers had commented and pointed out that why not have more options? More options is good, right? And while I do agree more options is good, I don't think it's practical to spend more money on something that's barely going to be used. The main difference between a desktop operating system and a mobile operating system is input. With a desktop system, you're looking for precision. Mobile, whatever you can tap at, because your fat finger is not going to be precise. Alright, that's enough about macOS Big Surprise. Why don't we talk about some of the problems that may arise with the new iMac. I've seen lots of leaks and rumors. In fact, I see too many videos of practically the same thing. But there are some things, minor things, that would actually make the Apple ecosystem make a lot more sense that none of those videos ever really talk about. So, I'm going to talk about them after I start off with the big and obvious one that everyone talks about. There are two main design choices in the renders that people keep coming up with. There's a reasonable one and a non-reasonable one. Here's what I mean by that. I'm going to start with the non-reasonable one. The ridiculous one that everyone's coming up with is essentially taking the current iMac, slimming down the bezels to Pro Display XDR-like bezels, but leaving the chin, and then slapping it on a Pro stand. To me, that doesn't make much sense because A, they said iPad Pro design language, and iPad Pro design language at the moment is one size bezel all the way around. Having a chin at the bottom is not one size bezel all the way around. And B, that stand costs $1,000. You think Apple's going to put an $1,000 stand on top of an already expensive computer? Maybe in the Pro line, but just the regular iMac? That's not realistic. But the reasonable one that other renderers have come up with is essentially taking an iPad Pro but removing the buttons. They stretch the display, they put the macOS Big Surprise UI on top of the screen and put it right on top of the current iMac stand. And you know what? Keep the current iMac stand. I actually think out of all monitor stands, which is something nobody ever thinks about, the iMac stand is the best looking monitor stand. Just keep the current iMac stand. Nobody really cares about stands anyways, unless they're professionals that like to spend about $6,000 to $7,000 on a monitor. Nobody's gonna care about the stand. Just slap the previous stand on the current iMac and call it a day. Okay, design's out of the way, but what about the other smaller details that I mentioned? One of them that is brought up in one video from Talos of Tech is webcams. We've been sticking with the same quality webcams at both 720p, both horrible potato quality. And if Apple can say, well, we can't really fit a higher quality camera in the MacBooks because the display and the lid is just so tightly packed together, that makes sense. You don't have to have world's best camera quality on a laptop. But a desktop, considering that that end of the computer is thicker, and Apple has proven they can shove a better quality camera in that top bezel with the iMac Pro, you gotta put a 1080p cam there. And then some other things that used to go around but has kind of died down and people mainly forgot about it, but I surely haven't. It's the touch bar. The 13-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros still have a touch bar and are the only Mac computers that have one. Why? Why is it only the MacBook Pros that get the touch bar and not the iMac Pro or the Mac Pro or any other Mac in general? Many people complain about the touch bar, and it's because they can't find much of a use for it. And the reason why they can't find much of a use for it is because developers don't want to optimize their apps to take advantage of it because Apple's only putting it on their MacBook Pros. A lot of people don't have just MacBook Pros. They have iMacs and maybe MacBook Airs. So why optimize their apps for a touch bar when only a select set of Macs have it anyways? So that's why I want the touch bar to be taken from the MacBook Pros and put on a Magic Keyboard for the iMac or iMac Pro or whatever, as well as the Mac Pro, because you can't keep this just exclusive to the MacBooks, because they may be some of the best-selling computers Apple sells, but uniformity. We need to have some uniformity here. So if Apple were to put the touch bar on the Magic Keyboard, that would probably solve everybody's issue, because then developers will say, okay, you know what, the touch bar is becoming more common. Why don't we optimize our apps to take advantage of it? And when that happens, then the users who complained about it will probably think it's more helpful than ever. But don't just put the touch bar on the Magic Keyboard. If you can, why don't you put Touch ID on it as well? Because we all love our biometric security. And why are you just saving it for the MacBooks? All MacBooks have Touch ID, but your desktop setups don't. If that's too expensive to put on the keyboard, why don't you put Face ID? I hear the True Depth camera sensing system is the cheapest part in the iPhone 10 when it came out. So if that's the cheapest part in the iPhone 10 and 10s and 10s Max and 10R and 11 and 11 Pro and 11 Pro Max and the next gen iPhones, why not put it in the iMac? Because it makes sense, right? And for the Mac Mini and Mac Pro owners, well, just put Touch ID in the Magic Keyboards that the Mac Pro ships with, or offer a keyboard with a Touch ID scanner on it for the Mac Mini, so that way we can all have some form of biometric security. It's a win-win situation. And then something else that came up when everyone's talking about the iMac redesign, and something that Tim Cook himself said something on stage.
And for the customers, we expect to ship our first Mac with Apple Silicon by the end of this year, and we expect the transition to take about 2 years. We plan to continue to support and release new versions of macOS for Intel-based Macs for years to come. In fact, we have some new Intel-based Macs in the pipeline that we're really excited about.
Why are you still shipping Intel Macs when you just announced that you're switching to your own custom silicon? Why not just start shipping your computers with your own custom silicon now? And then the last thing that we're not too sure about either, there haven't been that many rumors for it other than a screen size change. But what about the iMac Pro? Because out of all the Macs, desktop Macs at least, that I'm interested in, I love the iMac Pro. Are you going to discontinue it? Are you going to give it the same treatment that the current iMac is getting? What's going to happen? And then something else that was brought up in a few videos was less than 6 months ago, a little more than 6 months ago, Apple had launched the Mac Pro, the modular Mac Pro, the cheese grater Mac Pro with Intel hardware. Except now, those who bought it because of the longevity and upgradability now have more problems to face because Apple's switching away from Intel. Question 1, what processor are you going to give the consumers who bought the Mac Pro to upgrade to? Question 2, how are you going to allow them to change the hardware from the x86 architecture to the ARM architecture? And 3, how are you going to be able to convert the software instantly from the x86 to the ARM architecture? That's the one thing that I'm nervous about. Sure, you can swap out CPUs, all Apple has to do is just offer it on their store, they buy it. But what about shifting the software, because it still has to change architecture, even though macOS, big surprise, is optimized for both. And then the last thing that I think Apple should do or retouch on is the MacBook line. And while sure, everyone says MacBooks come all the time and everyone talks about MacBooks rather than iMacs or desktop Macs in general, because evidently these things get more refreshed than the desktops do, I want to touch 1 or 2 things on them real quick. First thing I wanted to touch on is the MacBook Air. It's a great laptop, and in general, it is the perfect laptop for most people. But there's a slight problem. It's a bit small. If you want to get a bigger MacBook, you have to go all the way up to the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which costs like double the price of a MacBook Air. And for a general basic user who just wants a laptop with the big screen, aka this guy here, why don't we have a 15-inch or a 16-inch MacBook Air? I'm sure this is going to be a market that a lot of people would participate in, and it would probably sell like crazy. Main reason why people don't buy large MacBooks is because they are so darn expensive, because they're the most best performing MacBooks Apple has to offer. Why can't you simply just put all the hardware in the 13-inch MacBook Airs, and put it into a bigger chassis and call it a day? I would buy that. Oh, not to mention, also make it gold. If it were gold, I'd instantly buy that. Make a bigger screen size and charge like an extra $100 to $200 for it. I think that's a fair deal. And then the last problem I wanted to address in the MacBook line is the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Apple, your catalog for shopping 13-inch MacBook Pro is way too messy. 4 different configurations to start off of, 2 different form factors. What I mean by that is one has 2 Thunderbolt 3s, the other has 4. And then the performance things. First of all, the lower-end MacBook Pros, the lower-end 13-inch MacBook Pros, those shouldn't even exist, because it's just competing with sales of the MacBook Air. You just don't need to have a MacBook Pro at that cheap price point. Get rid of the first 2 Thunderbolt 3 MacBook Pros and stick with the higher tier ones, because those lower tier ones, while sure they're cheap performance, or I should say better value for dollar, it just throws consumers off a lot. And that appears to be all I have on my list. I've actually scripted it this time versus reading, just recalling random things that I've experienced in my last video. Oh wait, last video was the Who's Stupid one. Go check that out anyways. Alright, well, I guess I'm done talking. Random Alpha, signing out.